Hello everyone, I'm Master Denes Boros, and this is the match between Jan Nepo and Magnus Carlsen in Game 9. So before this match, there were big happenings going on as Carlsen joined Team Nepo before the game, even though now from 1 deficit, so 1-0 from Carlsen, it was 2-0, so it was clear that Nepo has to change tack, and actually he did. Went for c4 after playing very many e4 Ruy Lopez Spanishes and anti-marshals. c4, and as Carlsen said in the press conference, he was surprised but not shocked to see c4. Responded e6, g3, typical idea of trying to get a Catalan, d5, but he does not go d4 right now because that would allow this bishop b4 check, and it could transpose back to lines where the bishop is somewhat uncomfortably placed on d2. Instead, went for bishop g2, and the idea is to avoid any of these bishop b4 check lines. Now, most of the time here, black would either take on c4 or take a move later, but Carlsen actually came up something unusual and original. He goes for d4, which is a very ambitious move, practically playing a Benoni type of position with reversed colors, but with white having some extra moves. Knight f3, knight c6, castles, bishop c5. Very interesting play and a unique one by Carlsen. Played pretty quickly, as it turns out was preparation from the world champion. The point is to over-defend the d4 pawn in case of trouble and making sure that white doesn't have a way to break through while black is attempting to castle. So d3, knight f6, knight d2, an interesting plan, trying to kick out that bishop so e3 is possible. If white goes e3 right now, black could castle or even consider taking, as there is simultaneously a lot of pressure on the e-pawn. But knight d2 is an interesting idea by Nepo, trying to do that without the bishop being on c5. a5, very interesting move as well, sort of predicting this knight b3 move. Knight b3, bishop e7, e3, captures, knight g4, which is important, because if black does not play that way, white could either go d4 or just prepare the d4 idea with h3, with a hefty advantage with center control and this bishop being very passive. So knight g4 was sort of essential for black's play, so he can get control over the d4 square. And after bishop c5, black actually manages to castle. d4, a4, captures, knight c5, and Carlsen actually admitted that as black he thought about his prep, and I couldn't quite remember the move and went for the move a4 to a3, but it turns out that rook d8 with the idea of e5 or e5 immediately would have been more precise, trying to put pressure on the d4 pawn. a3, and here Nepo, after a couple of minutes of thought, decided to capture, which seemed to be the less accurate way of playing. It turns out that b4 would have been better, and if takes, then there is such a move as rook b1, because if knight takes a2, there's queen b3, and the knight is captured in the corner. If knight c6, then there's knight takes b7. So b takes a3, rook d8, knight b3, knight f6. Again, very interesting decisions by Carlsen. Knight f6 is by no means the only way of playing the position, but Carlsen is not looking for adventures. Talking about adventures, black could even consider going knight h6, knight f5, trying to undermine the d4 pawn. But Carlsen is trying to keep it solid and see what Nepo is hoping to accomplish. And Nepo is actually playing this rook e1 move, which isn't too accurate, as there is no real target on the e-file. The queen, of course, is going to move away from this d5 shot, and it won't be an x-ray no more. So instead, the move queen e2 would come to mind with rook f d1, and there's some hope for white for an advantage. Maybe knight e1, let's say h6, and knight e1, preparing the d5 push, and get the knight to a better square with a long psychological battle, and of course a tense middle game. So rook e1, queen takes, queen e2, and in this sense the rook ain't doing as much as it would on d1, over defending the d4 pawn, and maybe helping the idea of pushing that d pawn. h6, h4, attempting to be active but ain't accomplishing a lot. Bishop d7, and that's a great maneuver by Carlsen, doing something with the bishop, which was the worst piece in black's position, and tries to over defend all those weak squares. Knight e5, bishop e8, over defending, putting pressure on d4. Queen e3, queen b4, again targeting those pawns, and as white is running out of active play, there's more action on the queen side for black. Rook b1, knight takes, pawn takes, knight g4, takes, h5, takes, rook a4, and at this moment, white just played the immediate c5, which turned out to be a big mistake. White still could have gone f3, bishop e4, with a roughly even position, which shouldn't be too difficult for white to hold. But after c5, this bishop gets trapped, and in comes c6, and now it is a fortress, and the bishop is doomed in the corner, as these rooks will be quick on their toes to pick up that bishop. And sadly for white, and that for Nepo, this leads to the third game loss, because you can't get the knight to d4 to excavate that bishop. It's just game over. You can't move that bishop away. Now, to Nepo's credit, he did everything in his arsenal to keep it going, but it was already kind of too late, and there was no chance in this position that he's going to survive against Carlsen. He did attempt to. He did have an behind the curtain 18-minute think, so he wasn't actually at the podium, but he was thinking behind the podium, and came up with the idea of f3, trying to attack the knight, rook e4, rook a7, rook b4, very creative idea. Rook b4, a4, captures rook b6. He is trying to argue that the bishop on e8 is passive and the a pawn will provide some counterplay. And it's a very creative idea, but Carlsen solves this issue quite quickly. Captures, knight c5, a5, a6, knight takes g3, knight a4, setting up this pattern of a7. So if black doesn't react, a7, and in fact it is white who will be up material. But unfortunately for Nepo, there is this move of c5, and after that bishop c6 happens and the bishop escapes, that genie from the bottle is just in time to save the day and save black from a queen promoting on a8. a7, rook d8, knight takes c5, rook a8, and here black won as white resigned. There's no easy way through, and in worst case, black can give up the bishop rook for the pawn rook and knight, and black is just going to win on the other side. And with this idea of bishop c6, Nepo decided to give it up. So that means that Carlsen now in a 3-0 lead, 6-3 in the match after game 9. An uphill task for the challenger. Still some mathematical chances, but this was a huge step for Carlsen to retain his title. So I really hope you enjoyed this little recap of Game 9. And if you did, do consider subscribing, or if you have any questions, do post it down below. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.